So this is the lecture 9, section 7. So we'll be exploring the inferior factors of production. Okay. So before I move on to the inferior factors of production, I just want to recall the definition and the characteristic of the inferior good and also the given good. If you remember, I think it was lecture week 6 or week 7. So we discussed about inferior good and also given good. So let's see if you still remember them. For inferior good, right? So the good is an inferior when your income increases, and then we would actually consume less of that inferior good, or the demand of the inferior good would fall, right? And vice versa. Or if your income decreases, then you would actually consume more of the inferior good. And then we also have given good. So given good must be inferior good, but not all the inferior good is given good. So given good is inferior good, but only a very small amount of not small amount, sorry, only just a small number, a very small number of inferior goods that is classified as given good. We know that given good must be inferior good, and another characteristic of given good is that when the price of the given good PG increases, the quantity demanded of the given goods is also increased. So you can see that it actually doesn't follow the law of demand in terms of given good, but inferior good in general, it would follow the laws of demand, only just this exceptional case of the given good, right? And for this, we could explain this phenomenon by using the income effect and substitution effect of the given good. And we call that, okay, so if we start with the price of the given good increases. So there are two effects that works together. The first one is the substitution effect. So if the given good become more expensive, then by substitution effect, consumer would substitute away from the relatively more expensive good to the relatively cheaper good. Right. So since given good now the price increases, so obviously with the substitution effect, they would substitute away from given, right? Because the price of the given good increases, and that means you would see the lower demand for the given good when the price increase due to the substitution effect. The other effect is called income effect. But the income effect, right? When the price of given good increases, whereas your nominal income remains the same. That means your real income, actually your real income falls. And if your real income falls, and because given good is inferior good, then when your real income falls, the demand for the given good or the demand for inferior good must increase, right? Because it's a given good, or because it's an inferior good. So the demand for the given good must increase. And as a result, you can see that these both substitution and income effect, actually the outcome kind of offset each other, right? So for the given good, this effect dominates the income effect dominates the substitution effect, right? And that's why we see that, okay, when the price of a given good increase, we actually see that the total effect would be an increase in the demand for the given good, because the income effect outweighs the substitution effect in the case of the given good. For a given income effect is stronger than the substitution effect. That's why we observe this pattern of the quantity demanded actually changes in the same directional change of the price of the given good, right? So this is like kind of an output market. In the output, we know about inferior good and given good. But since this lecture 9, we are talking about the producer side, the production function, things like that. So we now gonna apply the similar idea of the inferior and given in the output market. Now we're gonna actually discuss whether or not it is possible to have inferior input and given input in the input market in the producer side. Okay, so this is the consumer side, so we understand that. Now, next, inferior input or inferior factors of production. Inferior inputs. So the definitions of the inputs being inferior is when, when we increase the output of quantity, increase the output of Q, and then we observe that we actually decrease the employment of the inferior input. So I will call it decrease the inferior input. It is a definition of inferior input. So when increase in quantity, we actually decrease the input for the inferior input. And you can think about it like just like think about robot and human, right? So we can a production can be run by using either robot or humans. But as you would imagine that if you compare between robots as an alternative input and a human to be able to perform the same task, which input, either robot or human, that you think is inferior input? So you would imagine that human should be viewed as the inferior input rather than robot. Why? Because when you want to increase the production, you actually would possibly, right, reduce the human input and instead switch to more like a robot intensive production. And therefore, in this case, human is an inferior input for this production, right? So whatever input, it is inferior input as long as when we increase the output, we actually reduce, the employment of that particular input. Next, given input. So given inputs, right? For the inputs to be given, it must be also inferior, right? This given input must be inferior. Given input is an inferior input. Just similar to the given good. So given inputs must be inferior inputs, but not all inferior inputs are given inputs, right? So, okay, by definition, given input must also satisfy one condition, which is it has to be inferior input. That means that when we increase the output, we must decrease the input of this given good. Given input, right? So, and another characteristic of the given input is when the price of the given input increases, let me put it, and when the price of the given input increases, you would use more or less the given input. you will use more, right? You would use more, just like given good. When the price of given good increases, you would consume more of the given. You will consume more of the given good. Okay. So, right, if you recall this, for the given good, when the price of given good increases, the consumer will actually buy more of the given good. The same thing for the given input. When the price of given inputs increases, the producer will actually employ more of the given input. Right? And this is the definition of given input. The first one, it has to be inferior input, which means that when the output increases, there would be less employment of the inferior input. And also when the price of the given good increases, a producer will increase the input. They will increase the employment of the given input. So now we're gonna say that actually this given input doesn't exist. So let's start with so when the price of given good increases, right, there would be two effects in the sense that this is an input market, right? So the first effect would be the substitution effect, and the second effect would be the output effect. So the substitution effect, when the price of given good increases, then because now given input becomes relatively more expensive than the other input, so the producer will employ less of the given input and employ more of the substitutable inputs to this given input. That is a substitution effect. The other effect, we don't have the income effect, by the way, because it is an input. So there is no income. So, producer, not really income. So we have instead what we have the output effect. The output effect. So this output effect is pretty much follow this relationship of the inferior input, right? So when the price of a given good increases, it would increase the output. And then when the output increase, it follows that the input for the given good must decrease. And then you might be questioning, how come when the price of given good increases, the producer would want to increase the output? How is this lead to this? How the increase in the price of given good lead to the increase in the output? So you can think about this, right? So when you increase the output, being an inferior input, so let's start with being inferior input. We know that when we increase Q, actually we decrease the inferior input, right? And by decreasing the inferior input, right? So what it is that we actually, the producers save the money from paying less to the inferior input, right? Since you know that, okay, I increase the output, but then I employ less of the inferior input. Therefore, my marginal cost of this production will decrease because I pay less to this inferior input, right? Then think about total cost is equal to the bill times L. You can think of like, let's say that two inputs, L and K. So if we assume that L is the inferior input, right? So when you reduce K, when you reduce L, because when you increase Q, you would reduce the inferior input. So when L decreases, right? So then you pay less. The total expenditure that you pay to this, like the cost of the inferior input would be smaller, and you will be saved. You will have a saving of the bill, which is the wage rate or the price of this inferior input, right? So the less amount of labor that you save, that you use, the less amount of labor that you use, then that means the more amount of cost that you save, right? So each 1 unit of labor that you don't use or you decrease, right? That means you are saving the wage rate per each unit of reduced inferior input. So this wage is your saving, right? So your marginal cost, obviously in this case, as you increase Q, then you decrease L, right? And then therefore your marginal cost will decrease because you save the money, right, from paying these inferior inputs. So when your marginal cost decreases, you would want to produce more because now it's cheaper to produce, like your marginal cost decreases, then you would want to actually produce more. And this is the relationship of how we can see that the price, the change in the price, right? So here with this, you can see that this is the price, the wage. So as you imagine that when you decrease the input, right, every unit of labor that you save, it would reduce the cost by the bill. So if the bill is pretty big, if the bill increase, that means more saving. You will have even higher saving, right, from this inferior input, from employing less units of inferior input. When the bill is large, you have a greater saving. When you have a greater saving, your marginal cost will even become lower, and then you have incentive to actually increase the output. And this is the output effect of the increase in the price of given good, or you can call it the bill here, right? When the bill actually increases, then there would be higher saving because of the inferior input. Right? Higher saving means lower marginal cost. Firms would want to produce more of output, but by producing more of output, we have a lower given good, not given good, given input. So now, when you combine both substitution and output effect together, you could see that actually these effects, they reinforces one another, right? So when the price of given good increases, if given good does exist, when the price of given good increases, then we actually will observe a reduction in the inputs of given good, which contradicts to the definition of the given good, right? A given input, I'm sorry. Because for the given input, you must have, when you have increase in the price of given good, the input of given good must increase. But I just show you that for both substitution and output effect, there is nothing that would increase. None of these would increase the input of the given good, right? And as a result, the given input is not possible in our setup. Okay, so this is just the explanation so that you can actually read it informally. But I find that the way I explained earlier, it just summarized all the concept, and you can see the connection between given goods and given input. And you can go through all of this. So maybe I just want to explain a little bit more here, right? About the inferior factor has an interesting properties, which means that when the weight of an inferior factor increases, remember that the BL that I discussed before, the marginal cost of the production will fall. Because marginal cost is an additional cost of producing an extra unit of output. But when output increases, right, and because this is an inferior factor, we would actually employ less units of an inferior factor when output increase. And by doing that, then this additional cost of producing an extra unit would involve the saving on the wage, right, of using less inferior factor that the builder was talking about. And then when this wage actually become more and more expensive, the saving is actually become bigger, right? And hence, we have even the lower marginal cost. And when you have a lower marginal cost, you have incentive to increase the output. And if you increase the output and the input is inferior, when output increases, you will decrease the employment of the inferior factors or the given factors, right? And all of this is pretty much basically like a more formal way of what I explained earlier. So what I explained is just a summary of all of this about substitution effect and output effect. Okay, the marginal cost, when the wage, right? When the wage increases, then the marginal cost falls for the output effect because of higher wage mean higher saving. Then lower marginal cost mean incentive to produce more. And then when you produce more, because of the inferior input. So I think there is a typo here. It should be input, inferior input, not inferior output. The employment of inferior input would fall. Okay. And since both, you can say so that for the substitution effect, we have employment of inferior factor falls, and for the output effect, the employment of inferior input of factor. So this is a typo. Also false, right? So both factors actually, both effects actually reinforce each other. Therefore, we do not have a given good, because the given good means that when the price of the given good or the wage increases, we actually would want to increase the given input, which is not the case here. Okay, so in summary, this lecture we learn about firm and the production technology and how we can maximize the firm's profit in the short run and in the long run.